a great day, I'm feeling good. Oh, the possibilities of what I could.
What happens when a blind man, a woman of color, and a child of immigrants get together to discuss how diversity, inclusion, and equity affect your business?
I'm moving fast. Oh, I'm optimistic.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Choose Inclusion podcast. I'm UB and I am the Latino white guy of the group.
I'm Nina. I am the woman of color in the group.
And I'm Mike. I'm the blind guy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Choose Inclusion. This is UB. I am, as always, here with my co-hosts Mike and Nina. Hello team.
Hello everyone.
Hello, Nina and Ubaldo. How are you this afternoon?
Good. We're recording on a Friday before the election, so no matter the outcome, we hope everybody is safe and healthy and happy with their choice. I don't know what else to say.
And anxiety has been taken off the radar too. I don't know.
Something, right? I hope.
There's a lot of anxiety right now. I can say that.
That is true. So we'll see. But what we're really excited today, we have two great guests, husband and wife team, co-founders of an organization called KeyHubs in Minneapolis, and really fascinating story about serendipity and connections. And that's what we're going to talk about as it relates to George Floyd. But first I want to introduce Priya and Vikas Narula. Welcome to the show. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you so much. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here.
Oh, no, absolutely. I mean, speaking of connections, like this is kind of how it all started. So my college roommate, Patrick Donahue, lives in Minneapolis, and he had designed and launched an entrepreneurial event that Priya was in attendance at. And Priya gave this story related to Vikas and George Floyd, and my business partner Joe Thurman was there in attendance as well, and so then that connection happened to bring us to this point. And then there's more connections we'll get into because it's just fascinating. But first of all, tell us a little bit about KeyHubs and what's going on. What are you guys doing with that organization?
Sure. Yeah, Priya, do you want to go?
Sure, either one of us can go. KeyHubs, we specialize in, giving the self-awareness and awareness to others. We're a software and services company. And through I would say 12 years of journey, we have learned how people kind of, hang out in their own little bubbles and try not to get out of their comfort zones and make new connections and, mingle with the other crowds or other people who don't look like them or, feel like them. Anyway, so I would go back to, 5 years ago, Vikas and I learned this very clearly, and he actually ended up doing a TEDx talk, which he can talk about it, at the MCTC, which is a school here. Through that school, we learned how it's a different world, how, there's a whole group of disparities and, socioeconomical, change, and it's just a total different part of Minneapolis, which we weren't exposed to it. So after Vikas started teaching there, we kind of learned that, and we wanted to do something about it. And that's when we started to kind of get out of our comfort zones and meet people, connect with people who we didn't really know, and just kind of started to network and just learn, just get out there and learn different cultures, different people, and and see where we can go. And I'll have Vikas take a lead from there, since he was the starter on that.
Well, it's a joint venture for sure. But yeah, well said. I think I spent 15 years working for a couple of medical software startups. My training was in software development, and I went back to business school in 2006 and got an idea for a business, which is KeyHubs. And I quit my job 11 years ago, almost to the day. It was Halloween night that we decided to make the leap 11 years ago. And it was a life-changing decision, right? Because it was the first time I, jumped out of the nest and out of the corporate setting and into kind of this unknown world of entrepreneurship. And yeah, early on in the journey, I learned the power of networking with people and connecting, and it took some time to learn the art of networking and not using it for just purely selfish reasons, but using it as a art and science of helping other people and leveraging karma, right, to to grow and get connected to opportunities. And through a long and winding road of connection, as Priya mentioned, I got invited to teach as an adjunct at an inner city community college here in the cities. And I thought I had a pretty diverse network, being a child of immigrants, having traveled the world. I thought my network was pretty diverse and having networked quite a while as an entrepreneur. But when I started teaching at this college, uh, I realized my networks weren't diverse at all, because in my classroom, I had students that were either some were homeless or had experienced homelessness. Many of them spent much of their adult life in prison. They were coming from very unfavorable circumstances, uh, overcoming unimaginable odds. Like the stories that these students shared with me were just mind blowing. And I was at a point in my journey where I was really ready to soak up these stories, because I was so tired of meeting the middle class professional with the, usual LinkedIn profile. Like, I was really ready, like, where's the variety, right? And so I was getting a tremendous amount of richness from my students, and I came in with my own biases and prejudices and things, but they all like quickly got thrown out the window, because I realized you really couldn't judge a book by its cover. And many of my students became friends of mine. Many of them I'm still connected to. So I taught there for 3 years as an adjunct. Totally blew my mind and blew my networks open. And yeah, that ended up leading to a TEDx talk that I gave in 2017 about the power of open and diverse networks. That it's normal, based on sociological research, it's normal for us to gravitate towards sameness because it's comfortable, it's familiar, it's reinforcing to our value system. But actually, growth, development, career success, business success comes from stepping into your comfort zone, a discomfort zone, getting out of your comfort zone, pushing the edges of discomfort, connecting with people that actually challenge your beliefs, challenge your assumptions, make you feel uncomfortable. Like, that's where the growth is. There's friction, but if you can manage the friction and learn how to be a bridge between these different groups of people, it changes your brain chemistry. It puts you in a position to be more innovative, and 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 that's what I was experiencing, right? And as I was stepping into more and more open, diverse networks. And by open network, what the research suggests around that is, like, if you think about your networks, and where you spend your time, we're largely spending time in closed networks, meaning like there's definitive boundaries, like where you work, where you went to school, your neighborhood. It's there's not a lot of like flow of different people coming in and out. But an open network is really where the magic is, where there aren't definitive boundaries. I like to, in my TED talk, I talk about how the difference between an open and closed network is, if you imagine yourself as a sea creature, the difference between being in an open and closed network is like the difference between being in a fishbowl or an aquarium versus swimming in the wide open sea. And when I stepped into the classroom at this community college in Minneapolis, it was like I had discovered a coral reef with fish I'd never seen before. And my eyes were just open. I couldn't get enough of it. And interestingly, that experience led to new opportunities that advanced my career, my business. Not that that's why I did it, but it's interesting that that was my experience. It was very consistent with what the business research suggests around the power of open, diverse networks. And so this has become a whole long journey. I've blogged about this. I've spoken about it. My TEDx talk led to many speaking engagements around this, inspiring people to step out of their comfort zone and connect with people who look and think different from you. And since all the happenings in Minneapolis and in our country, the talk around diversity and inclusion and equity have resurfaced the a demand for this kind of conversation, right? And so here we are.
It's just there's so many things going through my head because, honestly, I think the primary reason we were connecting today was one thing, but you've just added a whole other layer that fits in so perfectly with what we're trying to do on the podcast, which is share these experiences and the knowledge and these ideas around how people can help build more inclusive places of work, right? And get to know new and different types of people, to your point. And how do we go from a fishbowl to an aquarium to an ocean of getting to know so many different kinds of people. So I love this. I want to get back to the connection part first and kind of talk about, so when we got on the call, you knew Nina, right? From the past.
Yeah, I just
Right?
realized that when you guys when Priya sent me the Zoom invite and I saw Nina's name, I was like, oh my God, I think that might be the same Nina I met 16 years ago in Miami once. Yeah, exactly. I mean, and just as we were talking before you hit record, right? I met Nina because of Shannon Mayorga, who I went to school with, high school and middle school with in Fairfield, Iowa. And I graduated in 1990 from high school, and I hadn't seen Shannon in 10 years. And we were planning our 10-year high school reunion, but we didn't have, no one in our class, we had a very small class, but none of us had Shannon's contact information. It just so happens within a few months of us kind of trying to figure, like, it was about a month or two before our high school reunion, I was asked to go on a business trip to Atlanta. And I happened to, long story short, I happened to bump into Shannon at the Atlanta airport. Like, we literally were walking past each other and we hadn't seen each other in 10 years. Oh my gosh. So we exchanged contact information, and I emailed the whole class this whole story of how I bumped into Shannon. We were looking for him, and we had found him in the Atlanta airport. And he was visiting, like, it's not like he was from Atlanta. I think he was in Florida at the time. And we both happened to be in Atlanta in the airport at the same time. And there's a long story of even how we crossed paths. I won't get into it here, but the chances of that happening were highly unlikely. Anyway, he didn't end up coming to the 10-year reunion, but we got reconnected. And a few years later, I was sent to Miami on a business trip, and I knew that Shannon lived there. So I messaged him. I'm like, hey, dude, I'm going to be down in Miami. You want to connect? He's like, yeah, let's hang out. And so we met up, and he's like, oh, let's go to dinner, and a couple of my other friends are going to be there. And one of those friends was Nina.
It's so crazy. And but at the same time, like, I think these types of things happen all the time when when people's hearts are in a place where they want to change the world. I over the last 20 years of my professional career, I've had so many things like this happen. And I think that when you meet people who just have that same attitude about life, that same attitude about changing the world in some way or another, those paths are going to cross in multiple ways. And I think that it's amazing because it's also just wonderful when you hear names that you haven't heard of in a long time, and then you bring you back to those wonderful memories too.
I know, isn't it wild?
Well, and so then from there, so now kind of want to get to the meat of the original reason we connected. So Vikas, you met George Floyd. Can you tell us how that happened?
Sure, yeah. Well, as I said, I love connecting, and I'm always open to connecting with people, whoever, right? And so there's a lot of lakes in Minneapolis, and a few years ago, I got a sailing membership at one of the more popular lakes in Minneapolis, Bde-Maka-Ska. That's right in the heart of the uptown area of Minneapolis. And I started sailing there in the summer of 2018. I take friends and family, and it was a lot of fun. I loved it. But in 2019, going into the summer of 2019, I was like, you know what? I want to just go down to the lake and like invite random people to come sailing with me because it's such a fun experience. Not a lot of people get the experience. And it's a great, like, intimate setting to get to know people. And I love getting to know people over coffee or walk and talks, but like, why not over sailing? And why not someone random? So last summer, summer of 2019, I started just going down to the lake and asking random people to go sailing with me. And I would generally like ask people who like I had a belief or perception that maybe has never been on a sailboat, you know, because I want to really gift the experience to someone. So I started doing that. I did it a couple times, and then one fine August afternoon, I went down there, and obviously, not everyone would take me up on the offer. Like oftentimes, people would reject me, or like, "Who's this creepy guy asking me to go sailing?" Right? And so one day, I was down there, and I asked a couple people. They rejected me, and then I saw these two guys sitting at the picnic table, and I just went up to them like, "Hey, you guys want to go sailing?" And one of the guys was kind of hesitant. The other guy was there was a big guy and a small guy, and the small guy was kind of hesitant. And the big guy was like, "Yeah, let's do this." And that dude who said yes was George Floyd. I didn't know it at the time, right? Well, I mean, so we get on the boat and they're just nothing but smiles, right? And it was a perfect day to sail. The wind was right, it was sunny, and we had a great time sailing. Like it was like we just instantly bonded. And George was super jovial. Like they both had his friend Alvin was with him. Alvin was a shorter guy, George obviously big. And they'd never been on a sailboat, so they were loving it, and we had great conversation, and they were taking a lot of selfies. George was especially like a kid in a candy shop. And then there were points where we sat down and I asked them about their journey, and George talked to me about being from Houston, working in security, and how he really loved Minneapolis and how he felt like it wasn't as racist up in Minneapolis as it was in Texas, and people are super friendly and nice, which that's always been my experience. So I felt really good. I was like, wow, just two African-American males who are saying that they really like Minneapolis. Just, it warmed my heart, right? And I really enjoyed hanging out with them. And we hugged and we exchanged numbers. We took a bunch of selfies. We even talked about getting together to sail again, but I never saw him again. Well, yeah, I never heard from him again. And then, fast forward, whatever, how many months was that? Fast forward 9 months, and George Floyd, gets murdered, and lights our city on fire, literally and figuratively, and then go ahead and light the world on fire. Now, obviously, so many of us were, upset, enraged by this whole thing. Like it just took our city and world by storm. And then like on June 4th, I went to George Floyd's memorial. I went there. It was really intense. It was like this interesting mix of celebration, protest, prayer, like tons of people. It was just unlike anything you'll ever experience. It was like kind of festive, but in a sad way. It's hard to explain, but it was amazing. And I still didn't realize that I had sailed with George. I mean, his murals were everywhere and pictures everywhere. And when it was around that time when I went to the memorial that I made the connection that, oh yeah, they're talking about his life, and they said he was from Houston and that he worked in security. And I was like, it had been 8-9 months since I sailed with George, but I was like, yeah, I didn't remember his name, right? But I was like, I remember that big guy in the boat. He said he was from Houston and he worked in security. But I was like, so here's the other thing. The day I went sailing with George and Alvin, I had snapped a selfie and I shared it on Facebook. And I shared it kind of as a way to just say, look, Black people aren't scary. Like, you should talk to them. And it was a subtle way of saying like Black Lives Matter, and also like an invitation for people who wanted to go sailing with me. So I shared the selfie and I just said, hey, I randomly asked these guys to go sailing with me today. We had a great time. If anyone else wants to go sailing, shoot me a note. So I shared that the day of, which was like August 14th, 2019. So I had this picture, and it just so happens that I lost all my other pictures because I lost my phone 4 months after that sail, and I didn't upload them. So I lost all my other photos of George because we had taken several photos. So that was my only photo. And I'm looking at that photo and I'm looking at all the murals of George, super sad looking guy. And I'm like, this is not the same George. These two people they can't be the same person. So I just was like, yeah, no, it can't be George Floyd, right? But then a couple weeks later, I was flipping through my journal, and it's so like I do a lot of journaling, and it so happens that I was writing the names down, like a sailing log of the people I was taking sailing, and I happened to write Alvin and George's name down in my journal, and that's when I was like, oh my God, that was George Floyd. And then to confirm, I Googled his friend Alvin, and lo and behold, there were all these news outlets interviewing him, like on ABC News and CBC News and whatever, and I was like, wow. And so then, I shared a post on Facebook about this experience. I like reshared the photo, and I'm like, guess what, everyone? This guy who looks really happy and smiling and strong and gentle and sweet, that's George Floyd. Now, I hope that's the way we remember George Floyd, So then that kind of blew up on Facebook, and then I ended up writing a blog post about it, and Minneapolis Public Radio picked it up, and then interviewed Alvin and myself. By this time, I had reconnected with Alvin. I had like Googled him and found that there was like a GoFundMe page for him that one of his neighbors had started. And I reached out to the neighbor, and I'm like, hey, I sailed with Alvin and George, and she reconnected us. Now, Alvin and I are good friends. We talk like almost every other day, and we've been to the Floyd Memorial together. And so NPR interviewed us. And so, yeah, I mean, just mind-numbing serendipity. And like, so many things had to happen for me to have a George Floyd experience, for us to capture that moment together. It's really unreal. Like, I've had a lot of serendipity, like with Shannon and now Nina, but this George Floyd serendipity like has topped it all.
Vikas, I really appreciate you sharing that story, and and it brings me so much emotion. It's hard for me to think of this, and I mean there are songs and all. I mean, there's so much that's happened in the last 4 or 5 months, with the global fire that George Floyd was unfortunately part of, right? And but I'd love to, you're talking about this open networking. You're talking about putting yourself in this uncomfortable position, and in which I agree, you be like this. It so fits what the Choose Inclusion podcast is all about. So I love the connection component of this story. Do you remember? I mean, like, can you share more? Like, you're out there sailing, and I've never been sailing, so I don't know. Is it a 30-minute experience? Is it a 90-minute experience? Is it half a day? Like, you get to know people. Like, I feel like you can get to know people in minutes. It doesn't take months or years if you share those kind of intimate environments. Can you, I don't know if you share that same kind of thought process, but can you share more about that sailing day?
Sure, yeah. It's true. Like, sailing is a very meditative experience. It's very therapeutic. And I've taken like longtime friends on boat sails. I usually sail from anywhere from 2 to 4 hours usually. When I sailed with George and his friend Alvin, we were probably on the lake for a couple hours. And what I've found is that it opens people up because it's a very intimate setting, and like, you're in nature, you're on the water. And so some friends who like I said, I've been with friends for many years, and I take them on the sailboat and they share things they'd never shared with me before. I'm like, where did this come from? Must be the sailboat, must be the sailing experience. So yeah, I mean, like, we just bonded, we didn't know each other, but there was immediate trust and friendliness. George was the more outgoing, jovial, just a really bright, positive guy. I experienced him as being a gentle giant, super appreciative, very gracious. He didn't talk much about his past, and Alvin was a little more serious, a little more like shy, but happy, And I think as our time on the boat progressed, they both opened up more and more, and were very appreciative of the experience. And they felt like, especially George, they felt like what the thing that brings me the most joy about that experience, especially since George is no longer with us, is that especially George, he just exuded pure joy. Like, he was just so grateful for having to me, it felt like they were having um, a privileged experience that they didn't expect to have, and they were super grateful for it. Um, and really like took it in, and like George was like jumping up on on the front of the boat and like pumping his, I mean, you see he's like pumping his arms, and he was just super happy. And what's so interesting is we all took a bunch of photos. I lost my phone, Alvin lost his phone, George's phone couldn't recover the photos. The only photo that we had from that day was the one photo I shared on Facebook. And it is the photo that I think embodies what we were all feeling. We are all smiling, we're all happy. It's like we've been friends forever, but we had just met. And I think that is what is available for all of us. We put up these walls around ourselves and each other, but especially now, with COVID and masks and whatever, I realize it's a health issue. But I imagine that when COVID is gone, my hope and prayer is that we will, connect with more open hearts, and that we'll be more trusting of each other, and extend a hand to people that might be hurting, and bridge connections through genuine friendship.
Well, and selfishly, I mean, that's why I was so excited to have you both on the episode today, because there is going to come a point after the election where connection is what's probably going to save us. And I want people to hear, because it's like people have only one idea or one kind of criteria that they assess people by, right? And so when people who support a certain side think of George Floyd, they think drug addict, or they think criminal, right? And they only have one picture of him. And it's such BS. Like, it's just that there's multiple layers to every single person, and the only way you can find that out is through these connections, whether they're deliberate or whether they're serendipitous. And I think people need to think about that before they just make these black and white decisions about, well, he was wrong, right? Because it's like, to your point, like, that's not the George. Like, it makes no sense. You didn't even think it was that George. And that's what's just so like heartbreaking to me. But also, like, I want people to hear this story so that they know, like, these are the connections that are going to save us, and they have to, because right now the other path doesn't bode well for any of us.
Yeah. I think these people, I mean, it's easy to write people off as this, that, or the other, right? But when you get to know a person on a human level, you can appreciate every aspect of their journey. That's what really transformed me when I taught at MCTC, because there was the Caucasian person who would come on in a suit every day, and you wouldn't think that he was some kind of, because of your biases, you think, well, this person is like an average middle class person in America. But then you hear their story, and they're like, oh no, I spent my whole adult life in prison for armed burglary and drug addiction. And you're like, whoa, really? Tell me about that story. Like, what was it like in prison? And we bonded over, like, and this is a Caucasian guy telling me this story, right? And then you meet the African American guy with like gold-plated teeth. It looks totally, you all of a sudden have all these biases, right? Or like, this person must be like this, that, and the other. And maybe there's some of that in their story, but like, they're the most articulate, high performing student in your class. And you're like, yeah, you just you can't just judge people based on how they look, right? And then it was like diving into like, I had a lot of George Floyd type people in my class. Like, there's one guy in particular, Gary, who I'm still connected to, African American male. He spent 7 years in a crack house, addicted to crack. There's, no life, nothing. Obviously, a variety of things got him there, and then he got like arrested for trying to like steal something, went to prison, and that's when he like surrendered to God, and he had kind of this. He fell to his knees in his prison cell, and when he came out of prison, he got into I think he said it was called Teen Challenge. Does that sound right? Some kind of like Christian-based rehabilitation program. And over a course of a year or two, he found Christ and turned his whole life around. Never touched drugs again. Totally, and now he's self-sufficient. Just bought a home with his girlfriend. The most stand-up guy that I taught. But he was the drug addict, the whatever, you know what I'm saying? But like, to me, he was a walking, living miracle, because it's easy for you and I, born into a middle-class privileged family, to have success and get our feet on the ground because we have everything lined up for us. But for Gary, he had all the odds were stacked against him, and he was in the pits of the pits, in the gutter, as most people would say. And yet, through the grace of the divine, he found a way to turn his life around. And so many of my students were like that. So when I saw George and Alvin sitting there, like, to me, I was drawn to them because I knew they had some kind of rich, interesting story that'd be far different than just meeting another Indian guy, or another Caucasian guy. You know what I mean? At this lake, in this nice part of whatever, Minneapolis. So I'm really drawn to that because to me, it's like, that's what we should be celebrating and studying and wondering, like, how does that happen? And isn't this a miracle? Like, there's one student in my class who was shot 3 times for stealing crack. And he somehow lived to tell about it. He was in prison, and he told me all kinds of crazy stories. And it was so rich. It was so rich and amazing. And so the people who write off George as a drug addict or a criminal, yes, he did all those things. But you know what's miraculous is that he's now reading the Bible, and he has a stable job, and he's trying to like make his life, somewhat normal. Like, I tip my hat, because if I was born into those situations and went through all that, I might have just like taken my own life, or still been in prison. And certainly there are people who go down that path, but there's many who come out, and that's what we should be like. I feel blessed because I know people who've lived that experience, who've went from the darkness to the light. And like, when I say darkness, I'm talking really dark. And that doesn't just happen to people who are marginalized. It happens to the best of us. We all know someone who's born into fine circumstances, but goes to that really dark place, and sometimes to the point of no return. And that's super sad. But there's richness in these connections. And I feel sad when I hear people write others off based on the color of their skin or based on, their past. Everyone has the opportunity to turn their life around on a dime through God's grace.
Priya, do you have anything you want to add too?
Sure. Yeah, I would add the same thing. Obviously we've all heard about George's past and how he did it. I mean, shouldn't everybody be given a second chance? And I think with his experience spending time with Vikas, it seemed like he was really trying to forget what happened in the past. He was really reliving the new life and trying to somewhat come out of it. And we should all focus on that, not on what the past was for everyone, or what the people did in the earlier age. Or so it's like what they're doing now, or how they're trying to get out of it. And that's what we should celebrate, and that's what we should look at.
Absolutely. And I think it's amazing that the stories you shared with us today. I mean, it's a lesson for all of us to recognize that we're all human at the end of the day, and we're living in a world where it's so easy to dehumanize anyone that we perceive as other. And I think it's so important that we recontextualize everything about our relationships and connections with everyone around us. And so I just want to thank you both for joining us on the podcast today and sharing these stories. I think our listeners will definitely walk away with some hopefully like good insights and ways to reframe how we're thinking about how we connect with one another. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
absolutely.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
having us.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much, guys. This was we get to meet with so many amazing guests, and this is not a interview I am going to soon forget. So thank you for sharing just a joyful way of looking at the world. Vikas, Priya, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
And thank you, UB, Mike, for the wonderful co-hosting as usual. Please, to all of our listeners, come back to chooseinclusion.com to listen to all of the episodes that we've had. If you haven't listened to all of them already, we are pushing stuff out onto Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Amazon Music now regularly. And thank you for joining us and listening to us. And we look forward to seeing you all next time.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Choose Inclusion podcast. Make sure to subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And you can see closed captioning for this podcast on our YouTube channel. You can find us online on our website, chooseinclusion.com, and contact us on Twitter @chooseinclusion.